Oh boy, do I have a good one for you today, guys. In this video, we are looking at the HOKA TECTON X2. Let's get into it. First of all, I really hate the way the direction of pricing with shoes is going because they're just getting very expensive. And the TECTON X2 is not really an exception. Well, it is a little of an exception. This will cost you $225, which is actually a pretty good price, right? Super shoes tend to start at the $250 mark. I know that the Saucony Endorphin Pro 3 is now $225, which is a pretty good deal, but that's a road shoe. This is a super shoe for the trails. And if you do any trail running, if you do any trail racing, I really think the HOKA TECTON X2 is something that you need to consider. This has been one of the more fun shoes that I have been testing. And without giving too much away, it's been a real treat to run in. I actually think I gave everything away with that sentence. Anyway, let's get started with some specs. It is a neutral trail shoe, and you know by the X in the name that it does have a carbon fiber plate. But this time, it has two carbon fiber plates. Those two carbon fiber plates run parallel to each other, so they give you lots of control when you're on the trails, running on terrain that is a little less than totally flat. A little techie, you know? How is that? I say I'm going to talk about specs and then I jump right in to the carbon fiber plate and start talking about the ride. Look, I'm going to talk about the ride after I talk about the specs. So the men's and women's version of the TECTON X2 are slightly different. In the men's version, we have 32 in the heel, 27 in the forefoot. In the women's version, we have 30 in the heel, 25 in the forefoot. Both have a 5mm drop. As far as sizing goes, a US men's size 9 will tip the scale at 9.1 ounces or 258 grams. However, in my size, a US men's size 12.5 tips the scale at 10.5 ounces or 298 grams. Guys, this is a very light trail shoe. Don't be comparing this to the road shoe weights. This thing is light. Oh, and if you are looking for something similar but in a road version that is also very light, the Rocket X2 is a super light shoe. But let's stick to what we have in our hand. This is the TECTON X2. Let's start at the top. Let's work our way down. Look at this heel collar. We have lots of padding around the outside. We want it to be comfortable when we're out there, especially because trail running often goes into the ultra distances. And in my testing, I would have no problem wearing this for a very long distance event, 50 miler, 100K, 100 miler. It is just super comfortable on my feet. Look at this. You see this padding right here on the lateral side and on the medial side. This is more just like a design element. It looks like there is extra padding around the heel collar. This is really just for aesthetic purposes. It looks good. It's got the HOKA logo right on it because this extra bulge does not go to the inside. We've just got a normal amount of heel collar cushioning on the inside. I guess maybe if you're running in a very rocky area and you kind of brush your ankle up against a rock, this is going to keep you just that little bit away, maybe prevent ankle scratches. I don't know. But most importantly, it looks good. The heel counter is quite a funny thing because when I squeeze it like this from the sides, it feels like there's nothing in there. But when I push it down from the back, it's actually fairly rigid. Now, I can push it down like that, but it is a fairly rigid heel counter. Now, to be perfectly honest, I don't get heel slip in a lot of shoes. But if you do get heel slip, I think this heel counter is rigid enough where it's going to keep you nice and protected and it's not going to move around at all. Now, the main thing that HOKA has changed this year in the X2 from the original TECTON, which, by the way, I did not get to run in last year, but the hype train of the TECTON X last year was just full speed. People just could not say enough about the TECTON X. But it wasn't perfect, and HOKA has listened to those comments, and the main change that they've made this year with the X2 is the upper. This year we've got a matrix upper, and it's just a little more dialed in. Now, this matrix upper is not waterproof, but I would say it is hydrophobic. So when you get the shoe wet from the outside, it's just gonna kind of repel the water. And also, I'm not sure how well you can see this on the camera, but I can see the camera through the shoe. So let's say with stream crossings or just running through puddles, the TECTON X2 is not going to get bogged down with a lot of water. It's not going to hold on to a lot of weight. Now let's look at it from the top. You can see just right here and right here, we do have a little bit of sole flare, which you can see on the bottom is a very stable base, which, you know, we want when we're flying across uneven terrain. And I did find it to be a very stable ride. Not in terms of stability, like a stability shoe, but a very stable neutral ride. Does that make sense? And when you look at the toe box right here, typically I have a pretty narrow foot, but there are some HOKA shoes that I've just had a little bit of trouble with because they're so narrow. Really, I'm thinking of the Rincon. But I'm saying that to tell you that I don't have that issue with the TECTON X2. I found my feet had plenty of room to breathe. There was plenty of room in the toe box for my feet to not feel constricted while still giving me a nice lockdown feel. We've got quite a few overlays around the whole shoe. You'll notice right here on the front, we've got this overlay, which is giving a little structure to that toe box to stop that upper from kind of constricting your foot, and also maybe to stop the sand and debris from getting in through the thin mesh. Got some overlays along the lateral side, again on the medial side, and the HOKA logo is just giving a little support to that upper. We've got typical overlays along the eyelet chain, just to keep everything nice and strong when you're locking down the laces. Now, the laces, pretty nice. I mean, they look nice, they work work well. The shoes never came untied. I never had any issue once I had tied the Tecton X2. The tongue is very thin. We do have a little bit of padding coming down the middle right here at the top. We've got one lace loop right at the top, and the tongue is gusseted on both sides. I think I'm pretty normal in that I would rather have a gusseted tongue than not have a gusseted tongue. Why don't you let me know your gusset preference in the comments. Okay, so that's the upper. It's the Matrix upper. I think HOKA has done a spectacular job. Now again, I can't compare it to the original Tecton X, but I'm very happy with how this shoe fits. Now coming down to the midsole, we've got the Pro Fly X midsole. We've got a dual density midsole. Makes it very easy when they're different colors, but on my pair, this orange foam on the top is going to be nice and soft. This yellow foam on the bottom is going to be a little firmer. Now, when I press it, it still feels pretty soft, but it is a little firmer than the softer foam above it. And then sandwiched in between those two foams are those dual carbon fiber plates. And you know, I think this is a pretty good recipe with the dual density foams. Having the soft foam on top and then the slightly firmer foam beneath is going to give you a soft landing, which I like that. I like to come down nice and soft, but then the slightly firmer foam is going to give you a more propulsive feel. It's also going to give you a little more ground feel. So you're going to feel a little more connected when you're running on the trails. And you know, the last thing that we want when we're running on trails are just a little techie where we could easily lose our footing is to lose that feel that we're actually connected to the earth. And let's come down to the outsole. HOKA is using Vibram Mega Grip with light base construction, and it is a beautiful grippy outsole rubber. We have 4mm lugs, which not over the top. I think perhaps if you were running in particularly wet or muddy conditions, not just wet doesn't really make any difference, but if you were running in deep mud, maybe you want something a little more aggressive. But for me and what I run in, and for what I would ever use this shoe, normally I wouldn't gravitate towards a very wet or muddy race, but I would find that these 4mm lugs are going to be absolutely perfect for me. I know when I'm scrambling up my sandy and rocky trails around where I live, I've had no problem with the grip, and the shoe just promotes confidence. I guess that's the main thing I want to say. Oh, let's talk about a downside while I'm talking about the bottom here. See this X on the bottom? It doesn't matter what trails I run in. Whatever I run in, I'm always getting mud and dirt stuck in this X. And so because I bring my shoes in, I don't leave them outside or even in the garage where it doesn't matter if I clean them before I bring them in. I keep my shoes inside. In fact, they're just off camera in some shelving units right over here. So whenever I come back from running in the Tecton X2, I do have to be outside and I'm getting a little stick and I'm kind of digging out the dirt from inside that X. And I realize that is an absolutely ridiculous thing to complain about, but I do want this review to seem like that I'm not just gushing over it, you know. But now it's time to talk about ride. And while I am talking about the ride, I think it's going to be a pretty positive explanation of how this shoe feels. So I want you to remember that it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns. I was complaining about the mud getting stuck, but the ride is absolutely fantastic. Now, some of you that have run in carbon fiber plated road shoes might be rolling your eyes like, do we really need that in a trail shoe? Aren't some of these carbon fiber plated road shoes just a little too stiff, a little too snappy to take on the trails? And before I ran in the Tecton X2, I might have agreed with you, because this shoe it's quite rigid. I can bend it a little bit, but I'm putting quite a bit of pressure on. However, that isn't how this shoe felt on the trails. And actually the carbon fiber plates that are inside the Tecton X2 are not super rigid. It's almost like they are beautifully tweaked to just give you a little bit of propulsion without making you think that you're getting that little bit of propulsion. But at the same time, you're just left with the feeling that these shoes are remarkably light and responsive while you're nimbly jumping around rocks on the trail. I really think HOKA hit a sweet spot with this shoe. Now, I wish I had worn last year's Tecton X so I could compare it, but I'm not going to lose any sleep over that because I am really happy with the X2. And if you're looking for a very high-end carbon-plated trail shoe, I would definitely recommend the Tecton X2. Oh, another thing, I've reviewed a lot of trail shoes recently, and sometimes I've found that I've been feeling some rocks through the midsole of the shoe. Like if I'm running on a very rocky terrain, I can sometimes feel that rock that I step on come through the midsole. Now, it's never a big deal. The trail shoes are made to handle that, but it is something that I noticed, mainly because I don't run in very rocky areas, so I don't test shoes with rock plates. However, the Tecton X2 kind of does double duty. It's going to give you that propulsion that you get from a carbon fiber plate, and those plates are going to work as kind of a little protection as if it was a rock plate. And that's where I think that the Tecton X2 really shines. You're going to be able to use this in a wide range of conditions. In fact, as I said, the only thing that I think this shoe might not be ideal for is really super muddy conditions, but I don't know. I'm not one to speak. I won't run in the mud. I will probably avoid the mud at all costs. You guys ever see any videos of the HERO11 out in Hawaii? That always strikes me on a rainy year that it is just a complete mud fest. And maybe in those conditions, in the HERO11, you might want a shoe with bigger lugs. I don't know. Let me know if you have ever done any really muddy runs. And also let me know if you've been thinking about getting the Tecton X2. If you are thinking about it, you should probably just pull the trigger on this one. I don't think you'll be disappointed. Hey guys, if you have made it to this point in the video, why don't you put the plate with a knife and fork, that emoji, in the comments so I know that you've made it all the way to the end. And the plate is just because this shoe has a carbon fiber plate. Don't really have an explanation for the knife and fork, but they come with the plate. Anyway, my name's Matt B. This has been my review of HOKA's Tecton X2. Be kind, be happy, run well. I'll see you in a couple of days.